For more information about the Con-Am question, and that's what we're calling it, the Con-Am versus the Con-Con, and that's what's going to be held next week. Constitutional amendment question about investment properties being taxed to pay for education. So I'll use that shorthand Con-Am for constitutional amendment. The reason that we're discussing this is because the issues are complex. In many ways, these two ballot questions may be the most important things that voters have to decide on. Most of the races, many of them, I'll just put it that way, many of them were decided in the primary. That tends to happen during the primary in Hawaii, a state dominated by one party. And so in many ways, I think these two questions, statewide ballot issues, are going to get a lot of attention. And I really appreciate you folks turning out on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm not sure if it's just because they got free food, maybe that's the draw. But I'd like to think that you're concerned, because another thing we're all worried about is our low voter turnout. And one thing that you should understand about the Con-Am and the Con-Con, if you don't vote for that question, if you leave it blank, that actually counts as a no vote. A no vote, as if you were voting against the Con-Am or the Con-Con. And that's something that has been upheld in court, and the legislature actually went ahead and passed a law to make it that way. But that's something to keep in mind. If you do not answer that question, it will automatically count as a no vote. So if you support the Con-Am, if you support the Con-Con, be sure to fill out your ballot. Don't spoil it either. If you accidentally pick both, that's going to be a spoiled ballot. So I have to read some information to you. Honolulu Civil Beat is a local not-for-profit news organization. We focus on investigative, watchdog, and enterprise journalism. All of our content on civilbeat.org is free to read, but a reminder that we rely on donors, large and small, to keep our news operation ad-free and accountable to our readers. As Ann said, today's event is the first of two panel discussions in partnership with Hawaiian Airlines on these critical questions. Next week, exactly at this time, we will be gathering right here a different group of people to discuss the Con-Con question. So I'm hoping you can make that. If, by the way, you come away still having a lot of questions about the Con-Am or the Con-Con, we have a lot of stories and a lot of community voices, guest op-eds up on our website, pretty easy to read. I think no other news site has been publishing as much information about these two ballot questions as we are. So please check out the website, civilbeat.org. We're recording the event. We are not live, but we will be posting this recording to YouTube and Facebook in the coming days. Here's how it's going to work. We're going to begin with statements and conversation from each of our guests, followed by a few questions from Suevon Lee. Suevon is our education reporter for Civil Beat. And then we're going to hopefully turn it over to the rest of you, because that's what you're here for. And if I understand correctly, you've all been given an index card, is that right? Great, and hopefully you have something to write on with that. We decided to go this route because it's a lot easier than just turning a mic over to you folks and trying to run around the room. And we found that it works out pretty well. And you can see Mariko right there in the Civil Beat shirt. We'll be collecting those index cards. Ben is next to her. He may be helping out as well. So that's how we're going to use the index cards for our questions. Reminder, be civil. That's part of our slogan. We're not here to argue. We're not here to upset people. We do expect a spirited conversation, but these four panelists, as well as Suevon and I, are giving our time because we feel it's very important to discuss these issues, and we hope that we're going to be able to provide as much information as we can. We're not looking for someone to settle scores here. We really do emphasize the civil part of Civil Beat. Okay, I introduce Suevon Lee. Next to her is Rosenlee, president of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. Next to Corey is Stanley Lau, chair of the Affordable Hawaii Coalition. Deborah Zysman is next to Stan. She works with the Hawaii Children's Action Network. And on the end is Tom Yamachika with the Tax Foundation of Hawaii. Tom also writes a weekly column for us, and he has actually opined on this very topic. All right, here's the question. If you haven't heard it already, this is the question that will be before all voters, and here's how we're going to start. Shall the legislature be authorized to establish, as provided by law, a surcharge on investment real property to be used to support education? And I told Corey ahead of time that he gets to go first because this is what you pushed for aggressively at the state legislature, and now you're getting what you want. This is going to go before voters. Tell us why we should vote yes on this.
First of all, aloha, everyone. My name is Rosenlee. I'm the president of the Hawaii State Teachers Association. I represent 13,500 teachers across the state. And I hope there's a value that all of us share. That every child, regardless of where they live, the color of their skin, and how much their parents make, deserves the opportunity for a quality education. And then we have to ask the next question is, are we delivering on that value? And unfortunately, right now in Hawaii, we are not. Last week, Hawaii was ranked as the worst state in the nation for teachers. The worst state in the nation for teachers. So what happens when your state is the worst in the nation for our teachers? They're leaving. And they're leaving in droves. Since 2010, the percentage of teachers leaving to the mainland has gone up by 84%. For the first time this year, we have over 1,000 classrooms that do not have a qualified teacher. And what I mean by a qualified teacher, basically they can be emergency hires or substitutes. And a substitute could be teaching a class where they're teaching an Algebra 1 class and they do not know Algebra 1. There have been classes where they had a Spanish teacher, the substitute in there. The substitute couldn't speak Spanish. Now there's so many substitutes that are teaching in our classrooms right now, we've run out of substitutes. So they had to lower the bar in order to see who be allowed to be a substitute. And now you no longer need a college degree. All you need is a high school diploma in order to substitute in our classrooms. So what does this mean for our students? About 1/3 of our students, 60,000 kids, every single day go to school and don't have a qualified teacher. So try to imagine a high school classroom where they're learning Algebra 1 and the teacher doesn't know it. Next year they go to Algebra 2. How do we expect them to pass that class if they don't have the basic understanding of the prerequisites? And they don't. And that is why Hawaii ranks 3rd worst in the nation in what's considered the 9th grade to college pipeline. Either they drop out of high school, don't go to college, or drop out of college. 3rd worst in the nation. When it comes to our NAEP scores, when you adjust for different variables, we're last in the nation. And when it comes to special education in this state, Hawaii is breaking the law. We have such a shortage of special education teachers that we are vulnerable to another lawsuit like Felix. And that will cost billions of dollars when that occurs. And instead of waiting for the lawsuit, we should be figuring out right now how to improve our education system. Hawaii's education system is in a crisis, and we must fix it. So the question is how? Hawaii schools are underfunded. When you adjust for cost of living, we're the last in the nation when it comes to teacher pay, and we're 45th in the nation in per pupil expenditure. So some people say, well, don't adjust for cost of living. So let's look at comparative districts. They spend about 50% more per student than we do, about $6,000 more. And the only comparative statistics we have in Hawaii are our private schools. They spend about $10,000 to $20,000 more per each student. Yet our public schools have our most neediest students in the system. 53% of all the students that go to Hawaii's public schools are now economically disadvantaged, which means we provide free and reduced lunch to these students. In Hawaii, it seems like everyone agrees, yes, we've got to increase funding for our public schools. But when are we going to have the courage to actually do something? And this ballot will allow us to take action. There are only 4 buckets that would generate enough income to make a dent in the DOE budget. The general excise tax, the income tax, the property tax, and the hotel tax. For 3 years, we've been pursuing extra funding. And the same groups that are coming today and trying to argue against the property tax have been arguing against all of these. It does not matter what the tax is, they're against all of them. They want to perpetually make sure that our schools are underfunded and our kids are not given that quality education. Don't believe the idea that it's only this one. I've been fighting them for 3 years. So, we have come up with a way to fund our schools. Why are our schools underfunded? We are the only state in the entire country that does not use property taxes. We actually have the lowest property tax rate in the entire country. And what is happening is this is not a good thing, because what is encouraging is outside buyers to come into Hawaii and to be able to rise up the cost of living for everyone else. Last year, 52% of all the homes in Maui were actually sold to non-residents. And what we've seen is in Kauai right now, 1 out of every 10 homes is now a vacation rental, and both of those are increasing. We've seen right here on Oahu, In Kaka'ako, they just had recently had an apartment building where the average apartment was selling for $3.2 million. And when Honolulu Magazine looked at these things, these were not being purchased by local residents. These were being purchased by outside investors whose only goal was to make a profit for themselves and not to benefit our children. So, you're going to hear many things, but we have been doing this for 2 years, and we have a very clear target. Second homes, over $1 million to fund our schools. That is what we were proposing next year. There's 2 steps to this thing. One, we have to pass the ballot question, and then we have to put the enabling language. Our opponents are going to try to say, well, it's not there, it's not there, it's not there. Of course it's not there. That happens next year. And if they agree with us that we've got to fund our schools, and they agree with us on second homes over $1 million, then they need to come in with us to the next legislature next year, with the Chamber of Commerce and the realtors, and all of us need to argue for that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to fund our schools. Now, I want to be able to have a chance to talk about their arguments. They're going to make 3 arguments. I call them fear, DOE has plenty of money, and the 100% guarantee. So let's take the first one, fear. Supposedly, if this passes, everything in the world is going to go wrong. Commercial businesses are going to go out of business. We're going to stick grandma outside of her house. Everything's going to go wrong. That is not looking at reality. Our legislature is not going to close businesses or send grandma out. There's very clear ways of the enabling language next year to prevent that. And they're going to say, well, it's not in the bill, it's not in the bill, because that's going to happen next year. Second thing they're going to say is, DOE has plenty of money. Let's do an audit. Okay? Fine. Do an audit. I don't care. But if we did an audit, then they would just come up with another roadblock to make sure we don't do this. And there'd be some other reason. Every single time we try to find funding, they find an excuse not to fund our schools. They don't want to adjust for cost of living. Well, that's our problem. Let's try that. Let's not pay our teachers to adjust for cost of living and see what happens. Oh, wait, we've already done that. And that's why we have a 1,000 teacher shortage in Hawaii. And the last one you're going to hear is guarantee. Can you guarantee this will go to schools? Can you guarantee the legislature will do this? Well, no, you can't. You can't 100% guarantee anything. But I can give you this guarantee. If this proposal fails, I can guarantee you we will still be the worst place in the nation for our teachers. We will still have 1/3 of our students going to school every day and not having a qualified teacher. I can guarantee you that nothing will change. This is the first time we've had a chance on the ballot to actually do something about public education. Everyone in this room is going to have a chance to make a change for our keiki. And the teachers of Hawaii are asking you for your help. As a teacher, we know what's going in our classroom. We have been in classrooms that are over 100 degrees. I've had to buy my own desks, my own supplies, and we're asking for help because we know what it's like every single year to lose teachers. So we're urging everyone to please vote yes on the constitutional amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. A couple of questions before we go on to Stan. To your points, that third one on you can't guarantee that that money is going to go to education. Do you at all get a little nervous when the legislature is given the authority to find some more money and that it in fact ends up going somewhere else? That's a fear that a lot of us have had, having watched the legislature dip into special funds and redirect money and so forth. There's a nervousness there. How would you address that?
I'm sure people are nervous. And so they're going to say, well, let's vote this down until we get a guarantee. And it doesn't happen that way. And I ask, what's the alternative? And the idea is they're not going to propose one solution that's going to genuinely fix their schools. They don't. If this does pass, it's up to every single person in this room to hold our legislators accountable. And I know we're going to go in there to fight to make sure that we do this. But I want everyone to think about what is the alternative. Because the alternative is we do nothing.
Okay, one other thing. By the way, this measure was approved by the legislature nearly unanimously. There were only a few votes.
74-1.
That would be one vote against, actually. Gil Riviere, I believe, of the North Shore here on Oahu. One other question, and then if Suevon wanted to ask anything. To your second point about, the DOE already has enough money. If my figures are wrong, correct me, but I believe the budget is about $2 billion, B as in boy, for the DOE annually. That's out of a $14 billion state budget. How much more money does the DOE need?
So we did a study and we looked at it. So what would it take? The public school districts that are similar to Hawaii spend about $6,000 more per pupil. If you multiply it, again, Hawaii, when you talk about $2 billion, it's meaningless unless you look at context. Hawaii is actually the 10th largest school district in the entire United States. So we have about 180,000 students. So $6,000 times $180,000 is over $1 billion. We tried 3 years ago to do a 1% increase in the GDT. That would have brought in $800 million, and it didn't hardly move the legislature at all. So we'd love to get to that $1 billion, but if we can't get there, we'll try to get as close as we can. We believe this measure will bring in somewhere between $200 to $400 million.
Okay. Suevon, any follow-up?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Stan, tell us what the Affordable Hawaii Coalition is, and then tell us your view on this ballot question.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Stan Lau. I'm the chair of the Affordable Hawaii Coalition, and we are an organization representing individuals, small business owners, and large business owners, other civic organizations. And our goal is really to address the affordable issue in Hawaii. And I just want to start off by making three things very, very clear. Voting no on the constitutional amendment does not mean you are against education. I'm a father of 2 young children in public schools. I'm a graduate of Pearl City High School, public school, and I went through the entire public school system. And our group absolutely believes in a quality education system. Second, Corey mentioned the $1 million floor, which is something that is not on the ballot. So if you look, the original intention was to tax properties, investment properties, over $1 million. And there's a lot of talk about foreign investment. That's not on the ballot at all. And so where does that leave us? The language on the constitutional amendment on the ballot specifically ignores any of the original guidelines that they had planned. And so what does that mean? For parents who had a property that are now in elder care, like I have a grandmother who owns a property and she no longer lives in it, would she be taxed? According to these guidelines, she would be. Walk-up apartments that are valued over $1 million, they would be taxed, regardless of whether or not there is this cap. And that's the danger of the language here, is that there are no restrictions on what is an investment property. The property that you live in could be considered an investment property. If it went up in value, is that an investment? By most measures and standards, that would be an investment. So we need to make that very clear that the second point of this being a measure that targets foreign investors and that it's targeted just for properties over $1 million, that's not true. That does not exist. And last of all, I want to make this very clear as well, is whenever any numbers are measured, statistics are brought up, the opposition brings up the cost of living factor, right? And Corey just referenced the Wallet Hub survey that came out last week, ranking teachers as the worst paid in the nation. But guess what? The same organization provided these additional statistics. Nurses in Hawaii, when adjusted for cost of living, last in the nation. 2 weeks ago, you heard about the doctor shortage. Guess where they are, according to the same group that put out this study? 50 out of 51. Washington, D.C. was the last. The field that I'm in, I'm a small business owner. I have a very small business. We have 17 employees. STEM education, STEM-educated professionals, which is the field that I'm in, they didn't do it by state. They did it by largest cities in the nation. Guess where we are? 100 out of 100. So this is not an issue that just affects teachers. This is a cost of living issue that affects everyone in this room. I'm sure if you're part of this airline, you can look at your comparable salaries, rate it against where other people are around the nation. Adjusted for cost of living, you will also be at the very bottom. And that is just the facts that we are trying to deal with. And again, this has nothing to do with us versus education. This has to do with us and addressing the cost of living issue. And so why is this important for us? Because you've seen the counties and the lawsuits that the counties are trying to fight against, right? It has to do with taxes. The way that this ballot initiative, the constitutional amendment is phrased, it says nothing about it being a tax. On first read, it sounds great. Let's do a surcharge on investment property to help out public education. But until you realize that it's a tax and how it'll affect each of us, I think that's why the counties are so passionate about getting this language right, because it is a tax. It's not just some surcharge that applies to just a small group of people. And that's important for us to clarify. And so there are a lot of other statistics that I can bring up. Corey mentioned teacher attrition rate. There's 1,000 vacant positions, but guess what? The attrition rate, which is just the rate that people leave the system, so the teachers leave at about 1,000 per year. So the 1,000 teachers that aren't there, they're the group that leave every year. So it's not like there's this huge vacancy of teachers. I'm looking at a report that's put out by the DOE. There are about 1,100 teachers that leave every year. And it's broken down. Guess how many leave to go to the mainland as claimed by the DOE or the HSTA? Last year was 411. So that's 1.8% of the teachers who are leaving to go to the mainland. And this is not isolated to just teachers. I had an employee that left for the mainland, and in our industry, in the technology industry, it's very, very easy for people with the right skills to go to cities like Seattle, San Antonio, Austin, to leave for better pay and lower cost of living. And so when we have the same problems, this is not just isolated to teachers. And so if anyone in this room, if you've ever thought of why you're still in Hawaii, why is it so expensive? Why am I making a certain amount, but it just doesn't go that far? Those are the issues that we're dealing with. And so again, we want to make sure that we are talking about an issue where this is not education versus our organization. This is not us against the keiki. This is really how can we as a community make sure that we can continue to stay and live in Hawaii.
Thank you, Stan. And by the way, maybe this is a good time to say this. You probably did notice, but Corey had some facial language when you were speaking. Each of you may want to respond to what the other says. I do want to get through these first opening remarks. First, you might just write down a little note. Same to you folks out there. As soon as Corey finishes, or Stan, and as well as Deborah and Tom, write them down because you don't want to forget them. And I'll try and get to as many people as I can. Just a couple of follow-up questions. Well, as Corey indicated, the language is vague. It's going to go back to the legislature, and they're going to be able to fine-tune it, including put in some specifics. Would you be more comfortable if they did, in fact, put that $1 million figure or $2 million and making clear that this is on properties that are owned by people from abroad, people outside of the state? Would that make you feel a little bit better about this?
Well, I think if you look at that, I'm not sure if that would even be legal, Chad. Right? To target an outside group that has no representation, I don't think that that's something that they could legally do. And so you're talking about other restrictions. What are the better ways? I think before we start looking for more money, we need to start looking at whether or not funds are properly spent. And so it was mentioned teachers are the last paid in the nation, again, adjusted for cost of living. In reality, teachers are, depending on what study you're look at, they're the 15th or the 18th highest paid in the nation. Right, so dollar for dollar wise, our teachers are paid better than average compared to the rest of the nation. Again, factoring cost of living drops to the bottom. And we're not immune to that. All of us in the room, when we factor in our cost of living, we drop right to the bottom. So let's look at the real numbers. Where are they paid, right? 15th, 18th in the nation. Per pupil spending, it's about 12th in the nation is what we see from reports. And these are not numbers we produce. You can look these up directly from the different education sources. And so again, it's when adjusted for cost of living, we need to see whether or not schools are properly spent. And I'm glad Corey's open to an audit because I think that's a great first step.
Okay, and one other question, Stan. You mentioned you're a public high school graduate, Pearl City, did you say? And your kids are going to public schools. Does it concern you when you hear some of those statistics that Corey cited, that your kids are getting an education from teachers that have a high attrition rate, that are trying to deal with the cost of living here, that grades, scores may not be as high? I guess what I'm asking you, are you satisfied with the quality of education under the current system?
Just give you some statistics here. I pulled this straight from the DOE website. This is the title of this stat here. Percentage of teacher positions filled with SATEP teachers. SATEP stands for State Approved Teacher Education Program. So these are the qualified teachers. Statistics-wise, every year, and this is just from school year 2018, statewide, non-special education teachers were filled 94%. The positions that are required were 94% filled by qualified teachers. Is 94% a really good number? I think so. Could it be better? Absolutely. If it could be 100%, that would be great. Just to give you an idea, the DOE's target, it says here 2020, 96% is what they expect. So in terms of having all these openings with unqualified teachers, the numbers here from the DOE state that it's 94% filled with qualified teachers. On the other hand, the special education teachers, it's a little lower. It's at 86% statewide, right? And so when we look at the positions and what these statistics mean, Chad, to address your question, I'm not sure if the issue is across the board where classrooms are filled every day with unqualified teachers. I'm 94% would tell me otherwise.
Okay, thank you. All right, Deborah Zysman, first of all, tell us what the Hawaii Children's Action Network is.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. So my name is Deborah Zysman. I'm with Hawaii Children's Action Network. We are a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. And our mission is really on building a movement of parents and families and organizations and businesses that advocate on behalf of children. So we work on health issues, we work strongly on education issues, child welfare and safety issues, and I think this is important for this conversation, economic justice and poverty issues for our kids. So we kind of work across the board. Our work and our lens when we do our work is it good for kids? Does it lift our kids? Does it reduce gaps that we see between children based on the color of their skin, based on their economic status, based on the geography of where they're born? So how do we lift all children? And specifically, how do we reduce gaps? How do we make sure that we don't have these huge disparities that we see for our children? So that's just a bit about what we do. On this in particular, we believe strongly, and we have been working now for 20 years, I would say strongly for the last 4 to 5, on the fact that our children deserve a well-funded, highest quality education system. And we look at that honestly as beginning at birth in terms of how we need to invest in our children. Education is one of those great equalizers, and it has a high return on investment for our community as a whole. So I agree with Stan. We need to lift the boats in our community. How do we move ahead and improve the future of Hawaii? Our business community, we all live here, we work here. How do we improve it? The way to do that, from all of the research, is really to invest in our children. Invest in those kids. And we are not doing that right now. We are not investing in the high quality early learning system that we need. We are not investing in our K-12 system, not at the level that we need. I think anyone I talk to says we are doing an inadequate job in that. There is a list of things that need funding. Our early education system is still lagging behind the nation in terms of our investment. We have a pittance, a tiny program right now. And the state office on early childhood has run numbers. If we want to get in the next 10 years, in a decade, to a third of our children in public preschool, that means just 4-year-olds, we need about $500 million to build out infrastructure and classrooms. We will need about $50 million more on our DOE budget to operate those classrooms, and the list goes on. In our K-12, if you look at DOE, we have crumbling schools around our state with deep need for improved infrastructure. We have needs in investing in technology for the future and our STEM and our computers. There's just a list of things that, in my opinion, are my kids, right? My kids deserve to have in our public schools. And I'm sorry, but if you go to our charter schools, and you should because there are some amazing things happening in our charter schools, we have programs where children are literally learning underneath a tarp and using a porta potty, and that should just be considered, that's unconscionable to me, that is part of our public school system and how we are setting up our future workforce. That's what we give our kids right now. So this is an opportunity that comes to the voters. Do we think we need to start funding our schools better? And exactly what we'll use those funds for, that's the next part of the debate. Because tell me, I've got a list. I have a list of stuff I want funded, and you should too, right? About what are those priorities? How should we use it? But we need to grow I always say, right now we're fighting over crumbs. Should we put a little bit of money here, or $10 there, or $15 there? We need to bake some more pie in the community, in my folks, so we're not fighting over do we need one more pre-K classroom, or should this school get a STEM program? That's ridiculous. We need to grow. We are at 45th in the nation in per pupil expenditure. That's ridiculous. Why do we think we're having some of the problems in our community? How do we grow the pie and then talk about where are we going to spend it, right? Where is it going? My organization, and actually me personally, we have been in the fight for years now on economic justice for families. So Stan's effort is brand new, but we are part of the Affordable Housing Coalition. We co-chair the Working Families Coalition. So at the same time, we are committed to making sure that we are lifting families out of poverty. I think this can be done where we are looking at a property tax. We are looking at how can we as a community step up tax property, which I'm going to tell you, and Tom can chime in later. Property tax is among the least regressive of the possible taxes. Okay, so as Corey said, what are other options? Do we want a GET? That was raised a few years ago. Personally, I don't think that's the best option because it is highly regressive. That is a tax that our poorest families are going to be paying. That does not get at the folks who are coming in speculating investment property. That's when I go out and buy my Spam Musubi at 7-Eleven. I am paying GET. So if you want to talk about what's fair, what's the least regressive, property tax is among them. I think the others could be, do we want to look at an income tax? But people haven't wanted to go there. I should probably wrap up. I think I've gone over my time. But I think, as Corey said, this does not answer all the questions of exactly how much money will go to what. It also does not answer all of the specific questions about the exact nature of the investment real property. However, I will say there are many committed advocates in the community that do want to make sure we are protecting our kupuna, that want to make sure, hands down, I would fight against any kind of tax that is going to tax people's first homes. That is not what we're talking about here. But there has been a lot of investment property in our state. We have out of state, we have international investors. I think if I have an investment property, even if it is a small investment property, I should pay my fair share. And the best place for that money to go is investing it into our future of our community, back into our kids, back into our schools.
Thank you,
I will
Deborah.
close.
Suevon, I think you had a follow-up for Deborah.
Hello, thank you. So I think a big question that a lot of people have is how this purported money, this new revenue is going to be split up, carved out, distributed for different educational needs. One of the biggest needs that we hear about, and this comes up in the HSDA's position, is improving teacher salaries. However, it's not as simple as just an automatic pay raise, right? Can you kind of walk us through how that would work in terms of collective bargaining, and how would that be prioritized, and how would you strategize around increasing teacher salaries?
Can I answer? Well, you can talk about the teacher salary piece. I would say, what a wonderful debate for us to have a year from now where we said, look, we have this amazing new pot of money to invest in education. What's the best place to put it? Are we putting it into this type of classroom, this type of new service? Where are we investing that money? Right now, if we don't vote on this question, there's no conversation to be had. We're still looking at flat broke schools, no new money to put anywhere. So I think, to me, Suevon, that's the next step, is to then say, great, we have this new pot of money. What are the best places within our education system to invest that?
And then I think you were suggesting that perhaps Corey could answer the collective bargaining.
Corey can talk collective bargaining.
Yeah, briefly, because I do want to get to Tom, but it is appropriate. You are the union guy at this table here, or this panel, rather. The question was about making sure the salaries.
Yeah, so how would that mechanism work? I mean, how can you guarantee to the public that this is going to actually go towards, how long would that take? Like, what could we actually see in terms of a spike?
I think that we have to ask the question a little differently. Sorry, I don't know.
I think you're fine. The mic's a little dead.
Okay.
There you go.
The question we have to ask is, how do we make sure that every classroom has a qualified teacher? And that money has to be done different ways. First of all, we'd love to propose, and we have proposed, that everyone that wants to be a special education teacher in the state should get free college education. We've proposed trying to make sure that we pay our teachers that are our special education teachers that are spending hours after class, that they actually get compensated for that. Would we love to see teachers' pay increase? Absolutely. So that we're competitive, not just to our mainland districts, but also that when students are coming up through college, they say, I want to be a teacher because this is a living I can make and I will not have to take a vow of poverty to do so.
Okay, thank you. Deborah, one follow-up question, and then I'll go on to Tom. And by the way, we are getting great questions already from the audience. Thank you very much. Deborah, I have to ask you, maybe I need a little history lesson here. You mentioned the sorry state of pre-K, and yet we always talk about how we care about the keiki. It doesn't seem to ring true. Weren't you involved in a statewide initiative ballot question just a few years ago regarding pre-K?
Oh, I was.
Just briefly tell us about what happened. It seems to have some relevance to the current ballot issue, but very briefly.
It's a little bit different, but I think that question, which was rejected, was if we should be allowed to use public funding, of which there is still not enough, for private early education. So that includes, we have Head Start is a nonprofit. That includes our community-based preschools. So that is the model that is used in most of our states, is that there is state money, and it is then going out to all of our community-based preschools. The public voted no on that issue.
What was the vote? Do you remember ballpark percentage-wise?
I
Was
don't. It was close, but
Okay.
again, there were a lot of negative, blank votes, which count as a no.
As no.
Also, it actually, interestingly, was much more strongly supported on the neighbor islands, where we have fewer preschool options than here in urban Honolulu. So that, to me, actually is an interesting thing to note, that where we do have families struggling, where there are not options, they voted in support.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. Tom, first of all, tell us what the Tax Foundation of Hawaii does, and then please tell us your view of this constitutional amendment question.
Thanks, Chad. The Tax Foundation of Hawaii is a nonprofit also, and our mission is to educate people, not only voters, but also our legislators, about what they're actually doing and voting on. Because a lot of people don't understand tax. It's a complicated thing. And they could use some education, especially the people in the square building there, because a lot of them, realistically speaking, they follow other people, and they don't, they may not have the tools or the information necessary to make an independent judgment about what is really going on. So what we do is we try to get in there, we try to testify on all of the taxation and public finance bills that are out there, so at least we can kind of raise the level of understanding, and so our legislators can at least be more accountable and better informed about the kinds of votes that they're taking. Now, on this particular question, what I think we got to realize is, we can say this is about education, this is about our kids. It's not. It's about a tax. Okay? This measure will give the legislature taxing power that it doesn't have already. Okay? And that's actually a very interesting thing, because the state started off with plenary taxing power, and it still has that. Okay? Which means they can tax anything. And they often do. The one exception that our previous constitutional convention granted to the counties, back when the last time we had a constitutional convention, was that the property tax would be the property of the counties and the counties alone. Okay? And this Con-Am seeks to reverse that. So rather than me spouting off about this, let me just kind of quote for you an op-ed that appeared in Star Advertiser on September 20th. And this gentleman, which very interesting viewpoint, says, beyond the conveyance tax, the legislature could also raise the transient accommodations tax paid by visitors, or the income tax rate on the highest earners who can afford it. They could go after all the unpaid taxes pocketed by scofflaw Airbnb operators. Supporters of this proposed amendment say they've tried all of that, but the legislature is unwilling on all counts, which begs an important question. If we can't trust our legislators to use their current tax powers to help our schools, why in the world would we trust them with an entirely new tax power? So that, I think, is a very important question that we all have to deal with. The legislature is currently giving the schools $2 billion in general fund money. What are they doing with that money that's already going there? Good question. Not only that, but let me also share a few other fun facts. According to a Star Advertiser article that broke on August 19th, the state is foregoing millions in federal reimbursements for services to Medicaid-insured special education students. Okay? The way it shook out is that the federal government reimbursed the state $250,000 in fiscal year 2016. $250,000. Okay? DOE said, oh, no, that's way too low. It's closer to $500,000. The average state received $48 million. $48 million, which is 100 times what our state's getting. Okay, why is this? That's one interesting fact. Another interesting fact, and this has nothing to do with teachers, nothing to do with kids, but guess what? DOE already has taxing power. Okay? DOE is allowed to impose school impact fees. So if there is a new development that results in new property and new people and more kids, the DOE is entitled to set and receive a fee per unit from the developers of such units. Such fees have been imposed on all islands. And matter of fact, just a couple of days ago, a new school impact fee just took effect along the rail line path, right? TOD, Transit-Oriented Development. The fee is $3,864 per unit. The DOE is projecting 39,000 new units along the TOD path, which is a combined tax of $150 million if you do the math. Okay. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of questions, so I think I'm going to stop there. There's plenty of other things I can say.
Sure.
And we'll get to that.
Thank you, Tom, and I'm going to have Suevon go next. I do have a couple of quick questions. I don't think those were fun facts, by the way.
But they're facts.
A quick one. Who wrote the Star Advertiser piece that you mentioned? You said September the 20th. Who's the author?
It was an op-ed.
Oh, is it from the paper itself, you mean? Not a columnist or a guest editorial?
It was, I think, somebody named Perez, but I
Okay, I wasn't sure if we could identify it. You mentioned the school impact fees. This is something that Tom wrote about for Civil Beat just recently. Corey is talking about several $100 million that ideally maybe up to $1 billion. Would these school impact fees result in anywhere near that kind of revenue?
No, I mean, we're looking at, for the entire development, about $150 million.
Okay. Over 30 years. Okay, all right. It sounds like there would still be a shortage of revenue to address all these other issues. But the DOE does have that taxing power.
It does have that taxing power.
One other question, somewhat off topic, but not really. You mentioned the CON and the home rule, the property taxes at the county level. This ballot question, if it becomes a law, does indeed give the legislature power it doesn't have, the power to tax property taxes. Should we have a CON? Is that the place to address funding education?
Well, that's one way to consider it, yes. I mean, there are a number of options.
Okay.
There are a number of things you can do at a CON, and that's one of them, certainly.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Suevon has an article up on today's Civil Beat. I'll let you describe what it's about, but it's basically about the money that's going into trying to persuade you how to vote.
Speaking of fun facts, we'll talk a little bit about dollar figures here. So I just wanted to, and I'm sure many of you have probably already read the article, so I don't want to like belabor the point, but we already know that HSTA has put in about $500,000 of its own money into its PAC to support the measure. And last night we learned that its opponent, opponent as much as you can say in this context, the Affordable Hawaii Coalition has gotten about $155,000 in donations from these business entities, including insurance groups, automotive groups, real estate trusts, investment companies, and $600,000 from the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, which hasn't been reported yet, but our Chamber of Commerce president has told us that. So this pivots to my question for Stanley, which is your PAC. You're a relatively newcomer on the block. You were telling me earlier that this PAC was created specifically to oppose the Con Am and to sort of harness the business community's, questions and concerns about it. So one of the questions I had is, some of these investment companies we saw listed on the campaign spending finance reports from last night, these are not small businesses. Lanai Resorts, Virginia-based REIT that manages the Hilton Hawaiian Village of Waikiki, sorry if I butchered that name, and other automotive groups. So how do these big developers / investors and companies impact the affordability of life in Hawaii? And this goes, I guess, to your PAC's name, which is Hawaii Affordable Coalition, correct? Yeah.
Affordable Hawaii Coalition.
Sorry, I always mix those up.
Right. So if you look at, you mentioned our total that we've raised so far is about $155,000. The HSTA, if you look at their union and what they've raised maybe 3-4 times as much as we have. And so we are a volunteer-based organization. I am the chair, again, because I believe in what we're talking about here, keeping Hawaii affordable. And so part of what we've done is we've gone out in communities, we've spoken to people, and I think, we don't want to mislead people with, name dropping and throwing out organizations that are supporting. Let's look at some of the amounts that these large organizations are contributing. Some are contributing maybe $10,000, $1,000. And what you failed to mention is all the individual contributions that we have that's part of our coalition. This is not a business-funded coalition. We have former teachers, we have retirees, we have individuals contributing to our cause at $25, $100. So this is not a one-issue, one-funded coalition. I just want to make sure that's clear and that we're not misleading people with what the campaign contribution report says. And so why are they supporting us? There's a couple of different reasons why. So if you look at, as we go out to neighborhood boards and speak to civic organizations, people get it. People get what we're saying in terms of the affordability issue in Hawaii. Like we already talked about, this is not something that just affects teachers. It affects everyone in this room. And I think that's why we're so passionate about it is if we allow additional taxes to be raised, whether it's directed directly to the teachers or another organization, that's taking money from each and every one of our pockets and putting it into the teachers' pockets. I mean, if you take a look at it, that's really what's happening. There is a particular group that is pushing for this ability to tax and using our children for this cause, right? Like Tom said, the state as is has the absolute ability to raise taxes to fund education. If legislators were serious about making children a priority, Corey already mentioned the 4 buckets that they could raise. The general excise tax, they could raise it like they did for rail. Income tax, they could raise that. Transient accommodations, which is what tourists pay, they could raise that. They have the absolute authority to raise these taxes to pay for education if it's a priority.
Anything else, Suevon?
Not right now.
I did have one question. What's the name of the PAC? I could ask Corey, but I know that you just reported. What's the HSTA's PAC called?
HSTA for the schools our keikis deserve.
Keiki, that's the key word there. You got to get keiki in your pack title. Okay, we've got a lot of good questions. Just some housekeeping. We're past 5 o'clock now. We are scheduled to go to 6. A lot of good questions. Right now, I want to give each of the members a chance to respond to something they heard earlier from someone else on the panel. And Corey, you've been chomping at the bit, so you get to go first.
I want to take a breath after this one. He just accused teachers of using our keiki to fund our schools, as if we're selfish people. Have you met teachers? Most of my teachers are donating money out of their own damn pockets to bring into schools. I've had to feed my own children in the classroom. We're not doing this out of greed. So please do not say that somehow teachers are doing this because we're selfish people trying to line our pocketbooks. Okay? Sorry, but that one really frustrates me because after the day, look, a lot of times the reason why we're so poorly paid is because teachers do not want to ask for money for themselves. And oftentimes we're willing to sacrifice, and it's hard for us to come up and do this and ask for this money. He said it before, and I want to answer this one. He asked the question, you guys asked the question, are you willing to do the second homes over $1 million? Would you support that? And then he pivoted away and didn't answer the question.
You're talking about Stan.
Yeah, Stan. And the reality is they will not find any way. The GET, the Chamber of Commerce fought against that. School impact fees, the realtors fought against that. Okay? We would have brought in close to $400 million if it had been the original price, but the developers came in and fought against this. And so the idea is they're going to do everything they can to make sure our schools are underfunded. He mentioned some statistics I really need to respond to. He suggested about the 1,000 vacancies, that it's not that bad, and wanted to disclude special education students. Well, we can't disclude special education students. And all of our students matter. And one of the statistics he didn't mention with 1,000 positions, that does not include vacancies. Because the hiring doesn't include that. So there's more positions not filled than that statistic mentions. You know, it's very important that we have these ideas and that we find real solutions, and these are not proposed real solutions.
Stan, the floor is yours.
I'd like to respond that my wife is here. She's actually a former teacher. So do I know the plight of teachers? Absolutely, firsthand. So I mean, just the fact that you're accusing about, you know, whether or not this is a keiki issue or whether or not we care for teachers, again, that is not the issue here, right? So just to address a couple of the facts here in terms of funding and what the teachers are asking for, they're asking for $500 million a year. Just to put that into perspective, they're getting $1.99 billion a year, and that doesn't include about another $1 billion from different programs. For example, capital improvement, they're getting maybe about $300 or $400 million on top of the $2 billion operating. So the $2 billion is actually just an operating budget. There's another $1 billion out there that the education system as a whole is getting that isn't really ever talked about. So what is this $3 billion, what are the $3 billion going to? And Corey mentioned that we don't have any solutions, and that's not true. That's not true. One of the things that really is never talked about is, and Corey mentioned it actually, is the audit. So yes, the DOE goes through a financial audit every year, and that's just to make sure that no one's embezzling money, doing financial fraud. But the DOE itself as a whole has not gone through a forensic or operational audit, comprehensive, whatever you want to call it, basically looking at the system up and down, turning it inside out to see, is money being spent properly? Is it going to the right places? Are teachers adequately paid? Is administration adequately paid? Are ratios correct in terms of teacher to student, administration to teachers, schools? That hasn't been done in 45 years. And to say that a $3 billion organization should not be audited, I mean, I run a small company and I audit our financials and operations constantly. Why? Why do we do that? Because we know as a business, we need to be efficient, we need to be effective with what little we have. And to not have an audit for over 4 decades to see if things are running properly is, everyone should be scratching their heads. Why? Why is that not happening? And so that's just the first part. That's just the first start to what needs to be done, to the solution. And so what happens after that is you get reports and results. And I think, to Corey's point, this is my personal opinion, not the coalition's, but this is my personal opinion that an accurate audit would be the best thing that the HSTA could do for themselves. Why? Because if you have an independent audit that says you really need more money, then that's not disputable. So why aren't we doing this? Why isn't the HSTA pushing for an audit? This is my personal opinion, but strategy-wise, I think that is the best thing that they could do for themselves, is to make sure the house is in order, to see what funding needs to be made available, and then press for it. That's the best thing that they could do for themselves.
Okay, thank you. That was actually one of our questions. Why hasn't there been, and by audit, you mean forensic audit is what you're suggesting, not done in 40 years. There's a lot of audits going around. HART has an audit as part of the tax bailout, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and so forth. I think poor Les Kondo, the state auditor, is going to have a heart attack here pretty soon. But I do want to give Deborah and Tom a chance, if you wish, to respond to anything that you heard earlier, and I do have questions. But please, Deborah.
There's so much. I would start by inviting Hawaiian Airlines, the Affordable Hawaii Coalition, any of the other businesses in the room, I think, to join our table on long and deep conversations around affordability for our working families. We've been having these conversations for years now, and how do we lift worker pay? We know right now people are working multiple jobs to get by. That's not sustainable. We are also working strongly on how do we increase true affordable housing in our community. I would say that many of the folks that are funding opposition to this question are the same companies who have opposed any conversations around lifting the minimum wage, and who have opposed any conversation in our community around true investment in affordable housing and demanding it. So bills that have been passed in the last couple of years have really, when you strip them apart, benefited big developers more than building out more affordable housing for our families. So I welcome anyone to that conversation of how do we lift our salaries across the board to ensure that our families can buy their groceries, pay their rent, et cetera, and how do we legitimately raise our affordable housing stock? I actually think that addressing property tax to look to remove speculation is one way to do that. I am not a tax expert, so I'll defer to Tom on that. So I think the coalition's been formed to oppose this particular thing, and I think it will disappear and not really be still at the table to talk about how do we make Hawaii affordable for our families. We will be. So anyone who would like to join that, please see us. And I still believe that we as a community need to grapple with that idea of, if we want a sustainable, affordable community of our future, we need to invest in our future workforce. The way to do that is with our birth up through university education system. And I think we have to legitimately, then we as a community need to be willing to pay for that. Other states have grappled with this question as well. Now, again, do we hope that some of it will come from out-of-state investors? Perhaps. But I think we should also take a look at, as I am a property owner, I own my house, am I willing to pay a little bit more? I actually am. I would say I'm happy to pay a little bit more in my taxes. I think we should make sure it's not out of control. But if it goes to improve our kids and our schools, that's something that, for me, I think that's the question people need to look at internally. Are we willing to pay more in taxes to invest in the many things that our schools need, that our kids need?
Tom.
Well, what I wanted to do was just expand a little bit on what you can and can't tax, because there were some questions raised about, can we nail these developers? Can we, go after these nasty foreign real estate speculators? That kind of thing. Okay, there are constraints on our ability to tax provided by the U.S. Constitution. We're a state like 49 other states, and we're subject to these restrictions. One of these is that you can't discriminate on the basis of race or sex. Okay, I mean that sounds fairly obvious, okay? You also can't discriminate on the basis of nationality, okay? Only the feds can do that. States cannot. Yeah, so let Donald Trump do his thing on the federal stage, but we can't do it as a state, okay? We also can't discriminate, you know, a tax can't discriminate on the basis of where you're resident, okay? So we can't, you know, impose, say, a property tax on non-residents that's twice what residents pay. That's why the current system, like in here in Honolulu, is phrased in terms of, okay, well, are you eligible for a home exemption? If you aren't and your property is over $1 million, that's when you qualify for the second higher tax rates. Okay? So that it's all non-discriminatory, it's all general laws. So just wanted to make sure that you all knew that we have constraints, and here are some of them.
Okay, the questions, oh boy, and anybody can chime in. It's kind of like Family Feud. If you hit the buzzer first, speak loud, but I will give everybody an opportunity if they do wish to respond. How about a lottery? A lottery, presumably, to direct the money towards education. Anyone? Lottery? Corey?
I can take it. So when we've come up with this one, it's not like we've looked at other things. We have looked at gambling, we looked at lottery, looked at marijuana, okay? Everything's been up in the air to look to see how we can fund our schools. And the approximation is that $240 million will be brought in by a lottery. But the problem is about 70% of the lottery earnings actually pay for lottery winnings and to do the upkeep. So it would only bring in about $70 to $80 million, and about 50% of all lottery tickets are purchased by the bottom 20% of income earners. So it's a horribly regressive tax that wouldn't generate enough income.
Okay, anybody else? Lottery, Tom?
Yeah, and one also thing that you have to realize is that once you legalize gambling in a state in any form, then there are other laws that we have no control over that permit other kinds of gambling. For example, there is the Indian Civil Rights Act that will permit an Indian tribe to come here and set up casinos after we legalize gambling. They can't now because we don't allow gambling in any form, and that's why Utah can keep the casinos out. That's why we can keep the casinos out. If we went down the lottery path, we would have a harder time.
Okay, anyone else on the lottery question? Stan, specific to you, would your group support or at least not oppose an increase in the TAT, the Transient Accommodations Tax, the hotel tax, to fund public education? We mentioned the 4 pots. That's one of them.
Chad, that's actually a really good question. If you look at the history of the transient accommodation tax, this was a tax that was created specifically to build the convention center. And that's all it was for, right? So this is a tax that was enacted about 20 years ago, and it had a specific purpose, it had a specific lifespan, but it's still in existence today. It started out at about 4%, and it's now closer to 11 point something percent. And so what does that tell us? That the legislature, when given the opportunity to take something like the TOT that was created for a very specific purpose and morph it into something that's completely different. If you look at the TAT, part of that is now being used to fund the rail. Right? So we need to ask questions like this. If we give the legislature an additional tax pool, can we trust them to do what's right with it? Will the monies that are collected, if this were to go through and they were to, create legislation around it, will the additional funds actually make it to the schools? Anyone, and I think Corey himself said that there's no guarantees that that'll happen. How do we know that if it raises additional money that the legislature won't pull back what they've already allotted to the schools? There's no guarantees. And I know Corey said, we can't give any guarantees. We're going to talk about guarantees. But I think everyone in this room, if given the opportunity to consider whether or not we should give these types of powers to the legislature, knowing that there's history in abusing the taxes, I think everyone in here should ask, can we trust them to do the right thing if we give them this authority without any kind of guidelines?
Thanks,
So just
Stan.
to follow up,
Hotel tax.
No, the Chamber of Commerce was against the GET. The realtors were against the school impact fees. The realtors in the Chamber of Commerce are against the property tax, and they're also against the TAT. So basically, don't fund our schools, because there's got to be a way to fund it somehow. And the reality is, if they're going to fight every taxation measure in order to fund their schools, then they just make sure that our schools are perpetually underfunded.
Okay, questions? This is to Corey and Deborah. If you haven't picked up by now, the pro vote yes. Corey and Deborah, maybe you go first. Do you trust the legislature, totally builds off of what Stan was saying, do you trust the legislature to support education the way you envision?
I was going to chime in on the last one too, so it just builds off of that. I think Stan is framing the legislature like there's some bizarre, independent monster that operates in some crazy fashion. We are the voters, we are the electorate, we vote them in, we vote them out, we hold them accountable. They work for us, the public. And that is our obligation then as voters. So if you're not registered to vote, register now. I mean, this is a part of what we do. We need to be civically engaged. So again, that is our system of government that we have. We elect our representatives. Do we trust them? But they are not some weird being on the side. If you don't trust them to do what is right, vote their butts out of their seat and vote in someone that you trust, people. That's what we need to do here. So I actually do trust the process. I value our democracy. I value the debate. So I think there will then be a debate over the coming years. There should be, and you all should engage in it, on how that needs to work. So that is our legislative process. Come on down, testify, give input, call your lawmaker and tell them what you want them to do. They often will say, no one from the community calls me.
One of the stories that we had up this week, to this point, Donald Trump is actually more popular in Hawaii than the state legislature. I know, it has to be true. It was a survey, University of Hawaii.
So vote in folks you trust. I think that is the piece. We should have people in our legislature that we trust. We are voting for them to make decisions on our behalf.
All right. Instead of risking raising the cost of living with this tax, why not seek legislation to lower the cost of living? Anyone?
Well, the question is, you have to look at macroeconomics here and ask the question is this: is low property taxes good or bad for the cost of living? And the reality is, at the first glance, you say yes. If you don't have property taxes, that's good for the economy. And the exact opposite is true. Because what encourages is outside investors to come in and purchase property in Hawaii, driving up the cost of land for everyone. So just if you look at the Maui example, 52% of the homes were purchased last year by outside investors. That means that island residents were competing for the other 48%. If you have Kaka'ako apartments selling for $3.3 million, they're going to raise the cost for every other place around them. Okay, there's got to be, in everything, there's got to be limits. You know, there's a limit to the size of fish you can catch so that you don't kill all the species every single year. There's got to be some brakes on these real estate companies that are just buying property. If you go to Kaka'ako at night, you look at the windows, they're all dark. The reality is these are not being bought by Hawaii residents, and this is driving up the cost of living for everyone. So at some point, you've got to put some disincentive for these people just to keep on buying up all these properties that are driving up the cost of living for everyone.
Okay, Tom.
Well, we already have a couple of them. One's called the conveyance tax. On a $2 million home, it's 60 basis points whenever property is bought and sold. That's $12,000 right there. We also have something called HARPTA. If you have a property that's being sold by a non-resident, the law says you have to withhold 7.25%. The rate just went up, by the way, this year on that property. So the same $2 million of property, $145,000 is going to be withheld. Now that's going to be paying for income tax on the capital gains. Okay, so there are tax disincentives to churning property. That's my point.
Okay, Suevon is
Tom,
going to...
why do we need HARTA? What was happening before we had HARTA?
HARPTA is a withholding measure, and the need for it is some people weren't paying their tax like they're supposed to.
The foreign buyers were selling their property and then leaving without paying any taxation. So they did not care about the local taxes and doing it, and that's what installed it.
Go ahead, Stan.
Can I just chime in? So just to clarify a couple of things, the low property tax rate, that's been talked about. And you know what, it's absolutely true. Property taxes do not fund education in Hawaii. But that's the way the system is set up. The state pays for our education, which is why if you look at the statistics, we as the people in Hawaii, we have the second highest tax burden in the nation. Right? So just because you spout out facts that say the county and property taxes do not pay for the education system, that's absolutely true. It's because the system does not work that way. The state pays for our education. So if you also look at the original question had to do with cost of living, property taxes by themselves do not drive up property prices. Right? This is a very simple supply and demand issue. Right? If you look at the major cost factors, why is it so expensive to live in Hawaii? There's a few, but the top two are one, housing, and two, it's usually energy-related costs. Right? So instead of raising property taxes, if you're talking about solutions, we need to address the availability of property. Not just affordable housing and designating specific units to make them affordable, but the housing situation as a whole so that we can all have a home that's affordable. And I think everyone is in favor of that, but that's not something that we're talking about today. If we're talking just about the cost of living issue.
Okay, briefly, Tom, and then I want Suevon to return to the questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. No, and on that point, I just want everybody to realize that we're talking in this constitutional amendment measure about investment property, right? You show me a renter, and I'll show you investment property. Think about that.
Got it. Suevon, questions?
So about rents, and this is a question from the audience. So if the Con Am passes, and this is a question for the Con Am supporters, specifically Corey, if the Con Am passes, rents will rise, so the cost of living for tenants may also rise. Your teachers who are primarily renters, what would you say to them? What's your response to that?
So only about less than 4% of homes in Hawaii are second homes over $1 million. And you don't win a ballot measure with only 4%. So the only way they're going to win this is by attacking renters and trying to make renters afraid. And to the point that Deb made earlier, look, we've been doing this for years, trying to do this one. And they're going to say, well, you can't guarantee. Next year, if the constitutional amendment passes, the bill we'll be proposing are second homes over $1 million. Legislators are not going to go after renters, and there's a reason why. Because that is not popular, and that's why they use the argument. There are not many people that are renting second homes over $1 million. There are very few in the system. And this is not what we're going for. This is the fear they're going to use, and it's just not the reality of what's been discussed for years.
I actually kind of want to reiterate one of Chad's earlier questions because I don't know if it was fully answered, Stanley. Would you support a measure that specifically stated this surcharge would only apply to investment properties with a $1 million, $2 million floor, what have you, excluding commercial properties? Would you support such a measure?
The answer is no. And here's the reason why. Again, this is not, if you look at what the fundamental issue here is, this is a constitutional amendment issue. The issue is whether or not we're taxing properties, whether or not this goes to education. The real issue is what you are voting for is to give the legislature the right, the authority, as allowed by the Constitution, to impose a new tax on all of us. That's what we're voting for. So whether there are limits or not, the legislature does not have that ability to do this right now. And there are other means. Like I said earlier, the legislature has the full authority and ability to raise money if they really wanted to, with their existing taxing powers. But to fundamentally change the Constitution to give the legislature a new right and ability to tax all of us, that's really what is a big issue that I think we need to think about.
Okay, I think Deborah wanted
Can I
to
ask
jump
then-
in. Sure.
Can I ask then, what taxes would affordable Hawaii support and get behind if we put a proposal on the table?
So I'm the chair. I cannot speak for the entire organization and the people that are with us. But again, I think the main thing that we need to look at, like I said, if the HSTA is for an audit, I think that's the first place to start. Figure out if things are running properly, if there's enough money, whether or not you need more money. And once that's validated, then you seek the funds. And I don't dictate where the funds come from, whether that comes from the GET, the income tax, the TAT, whether they decide to tax something else, whether it's lottery or whatnot. At that point, the legislature should use their full authority, which they already have, to raise the funds that have been verified.
So if the audit comes back that we need more funds for education, let's say it does, are we going to have Affordable Hawaii supporters in there supporting raising the GET, pick your tax?
So again, I'm not going to speak for the entire organization, but I think if it's verified that there's an amount that's needed, I know I'm personally all for that, right? We are all for quality education. If it's verified that there are funds that are needed, I think the legislature should promptly, and again, I cannot speak on their behalf, but I would think in terms of the legislative process, they would look into that and fully implement what they need to.
Okay, Tom, hang on just a second. Important announcement. It's past 5:30. I guess that means happy hour is approaching in some places, but we're doing really good on time. Go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, and I forgot my chain of thought.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
We'll come back to it.
It must not have been important.
Deborah actually got to this earlier, and we may as well ask everybody else on the panel. Who of you would be personally impacted by the proposed tax?
I'm sorry,
I think,
what is the question?
if this thing passes and there's let's say, a tax on investment properties worth $1 million or more, who of you would be impacted? In other words, who would be paying on? I would not.
Sure.
Are you so
I
sure?
own my own home.
Am I
but
so sure? I rent, so I'm guessing no.
But IRS
Oh,
But-
I
but
suppose
also
my
maybe-
landlord could burn me. I
But-
guess that could happen.
But is the question like, would our organizations receive money? So mine would certainly not, as a community nonprofit. Like, we wouldn't get any of the funding.
Okay,
Is that
I
the
must
question?
admit,
I'm trying to understand.
my landlord does own a property worth over $1 million. I live in Manoa, so, Tom, okay,
less than 1%
okay,
of Hawaii residents own second homes over $1 million.
okay.
I mean,
all right.
but why are we talking about second homes over $1 million? The Con-Am is worded much more broadly than that. What Mr. Rosenlee is talking about is the first version of the Con-Am legislation, which did limit itself to second homes over $1 million. But that's not what passed. What passed is investment property. And furthermore, when Suevon interviewed Justin Woodson, who is the House Education Chair, he was quoted as saying this was a very advertent decision. They put a lot of thought into it. They wanted to make it extremely broad to give themselves flexibility.
And the flexibility was potentially to look at homes over $1.5 million, not to look over renters. You read the rest of the passage that legislators were talking about. And I challenge you to think of the legislator that's going to suggest to tax everyone next year. I mean,
We're going to get you a new mic, Corey, if you want to take Suevon's, go ahead.
So basically, the discussions, and if you look at legislators, what they said on the floor and what they've said in the media, they've been looking at second homes over $1.5 million. I challenge you to find one legislator that's talked about taxing every home. I want you to challenge you to find one legislator that's talked about taxing commercial properties. I want you to find one legislator that talked about taxing renters. This has been the entire time, the conversations that have been person on the floor have been looking at a very specific group of taxation for.
Okay. Suevon.
So So Stanley or Tom, and one of you mentioned having kids in the public schools. So this is a good question. What specific policies will you commit to proactively supporting to directly increase the quality of and access to public education in Hawaii?
I mean, right now, we all have access to public education in Hawaii. I don't think there's any question about that.
What specific policies would you back or support? I mean, kind of outside the context of talking about the tax and so forth. I mean, do you have any opinions on that or thoughts?
Well, maybe let me start on that. I mean, we've been talking, I think, a lot internally, in our organization anyway, about the waste and bloat that exists in some organizations, especially the big ones. The bigger a government agency is, the more chance there is for things that are spent that are wasted, or money that's not going to the right place. That's always a concern, and it's also a concern for big business. I mean, I worked in big business for a while. Now I have a very, very small company. But with a very small company, the concern for waste and bloat is a little bit diminished because there's not so many places it can go. But in an organization receiving $3 billion, there's a lot of places it can go and not do anything.
Okay.
Can I, because this
Sure.
has been discussed quite often, and this is where it gets frustrating for me. No one's against accountability. No one's trying to figure out waste. I've tried to as well. But it amazes me in Hawaii when we spend, say for a private school, spends $26,000, $30,000 per pupil. And no one's claiming that $30,000 is wasteful. And that Punahou must be, if we spend $10,000 for a regular education student in Hawaii and $30,000 for a Punahou student, then Punahou must be very wasteful. And no one ever claims that. And I don't blame Punahou, they do it right. I mean, they actually have small class sizes and qualified teachers. And on a day like today, air conditioning. But shouldn't we say that every child, regardless of their parents can afford to or not, should be able to get that kind of education? And it shouldn't be just if your parents have the money, you should be able to do that. That should be a promise that we make to every child across the entire state.
Okay, we have time for about 2 more questions. Suevon?
If Hawaii is the worst state in the nation, rather than buy books, supplies, equipment, and bump teacher pay, why did HSTA push for air conditioning classrooms instead?
Does it have to be one or the other? I mean, wouldn't it be nice to have a qualified teacher and air conditioning? To have a book and paper? I mean, it shouldn't be that we have to choose, okay? And at the same time, we were pushing for the air conditioning. We also put in a bill for the $1 billion to fund our schools. It wasn't either or for us.
Okay.
Can I address that air
Sure.
conditioning issue? If you look at how much was spent to put air conditionings into our classroom, it comes out to about $100,000 per classroom. Is that efficient spending? You can ask Corey. He was the one that actually spearheaded it. I'm sure it's not how he wanted it done, but by the time it was done, we're spending $100,000, and at my kid's school, it's 2 window units in the classroom for $100,000 per classroom. I'm not making these numbers up. You can look them up yourself, but I think this is where we're talking about an actual audit and accountability. And Corey's, thank you for pushing for that. I'm sure it's not how you wanted it to turn out, but the fact is that's what happened.
And we were there alone pushing the Board of Education and the legislature to change it. And we were screaming at the time to change it. And I didn't see you guys there at the time.
Just one final question, and then I have to wrap it up. It's been great, by the way. All 5 of you have been terrific. Is there any solution for education that we haven't mentioned? Of course, you've said, let's get the audit. You're pushing for the Con-Am question. We can't take from the TAT or the GET or the income tax. Is there any novel solution to help come up with the money, which I think a lot of us do agree our schools need our help? Anything that we haven't talked about?
I think one of the things we have to understand is that funding alone is not going to solve our problem. It's like 2 wheels of a car. There are many things that we've proposed trying to do project-based learning. We've tried to make sure that we go back to art and music in our classrooms. We need to find different ways of supporting our special education teachers. There's no one bullet that's going to fix this thing. But we cannot solve our problem only by funding, but without funding, we cannot solve the problem at all.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, Stan.
No, I agree. I mean, again.
Did you hear that? There was agreement.
I agree. And I don't think, again, we are not against quality education. I said that from the very outset. That's not what we're about. We're about accountability, efficiency, affordability. All of us, we need to really find ways to make sure that we can stay in Hawaii, that our kids, when they go to the mainland, they can make their way back, right? And again, solution-wise, I think the audit is the best place to start, because again, this is probably the best thing the HSTA could do for themselves, is push the DOE for an audit, right? That way they can get independent verification of what their needs are. Why are we asking for more money when we don't know whether or not the money is being spent properly, whether or not there even is a need for more money? I'm not saying either way, but I'm saying logically, why are we granting the legislature more power to tax when we haven't even looked in the right places for over 4 decades, 45 years?
Okay,
We have looked at the budget. We've studied it. And Stanley, have you ever read the weighted student formula report? Really?
I knew somebody was going to bring up weighted student formula.
It's hundreds of pages for each of the schools. Okay?
Corey has a knack for killing microphones.
It's not like we just decided that the DOE has plenty of money and we're going to go for a tax increase. No. In order to bring this proposal, and this is the same reason why we did air conditioning, we've studied this. We've looked deep into the budget. Okay? We know we're hundreds of millions of dollars short just for special education alone. And the audit would show exactly that. But the audit is not going to find some way hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay? If you want to do it, fine. I have no problem with that. If you want the bill after passed, the first thing to happen that puts it in there, that's fine. But you guys use it as an excuse, like you use every excuse, just to find a way to not fund our schools. And trust me, if an audit was done, you would find something else just to use it as an excuse.
Okay, go ahead, Stan. No, please, sure. No, that's fine. I saw Deborah raise her hand earlier, and we are running out of time. I'll let you guys decide. You can flip a coin if you'd like. Sam, go ahead, and then Deborah. We'll end with Deborah.
Again, so as far as the audit goes, I'm glad you're in agreement. Whether or not, as part of any kind of organization like this where they're handling $3 billion, I mean, even $500 million, whatever it is, even if it's a smaller amount of money, this is something that we should really be pushing for. And again, I think the results of it would come to, I think, the HSTA's support if it's validated, right? That's the best thing we can do. We're trying to work with the organization and provide a solution. We're not using it as a stall tactic by any means.
Okay, Deborah, final word.
What I was going to add in, I think it's a both and. I think we should always push for accountability and transparency, and I don't think we should wait for that before we push for more funding. Particularly things like our charter schools, particularly our early learning. Those are new programs that we know we need to grow, or facilities we need to invest in, where we don't want to slice the pie up even more. I'm sure, as Corey said, there's money that could be found in any kind of audit. However, I will also note that because our school system is unique and it is run at the state level versus county by county or township by township, we actually, when you look at things, have a really lean and mean education system compared to most other states. Because most other states have 40 superintendents spread out across that you're paying a superintendent's salary. They have administration in every single county and every single city. Now, we can debate that end, but I actually think, and I'm for accountability, so I have no problem doing an audit. I just don't think we should wait for an audit to come back to say, oh, look, there's $1,000 here and $10,000 there. So I think we should be pushing on all those fronts. I think we should be pushing on how to bring in more federal money, where we're leaving Fed money on the table. I think we should be pushing for accountability, and I think we should think about always how to increase efficiency, but know that the way we are structured with one state DOE is in many ways the most efficient structure we can have compared to other states.
Okay, and with that, I want to thank Tom Yamachika, Tax Foundation of Hawaii, Deborah Zysman, Hawaii Children's Action Network, Stanley Lau, Affordable Hawaii Coalition, Corey Rosenlee, HSTA, Suevon Civil Beat. How about a big round of applause for everybody? A big mahalo again to Hawaiian Airlines. Reminder, a week from today, should Hawaii hold a constitutional convention? For more information, be sure to sign up for Civil Beat's free newsletter by going to our website or download the brand new mobile app. Search for Civil Beat at the Apple App Store. And finally, remember to vote on or before Tuesday, November the 6th. Thank you, everybody.